the glamour and excitement of music kind of is transferred to the philosophy, and the philosophy is pretty glamorous, I think, especially the stuff I was reading in the 80s, which was Roland Barthes and Julia Kristeva and, all those people. And then in the 90s I started reading, Virilio and that kind of thing. It's quite exciting and glamorous, I think. There was a good piece recently by Owen Hatherley about the Foreign Agents series that Semiotics used to do. Do you remember them?
Yeah, I read the piece. Yeah, it's really nice.
The little black books. They were kind of sexy, sexy little books. So there was a kind of glamour to, it didn't seem particularly like scholarly work, even though, they were all professors. A lot of them were professors and, had studied deeply and read all the Western philosophy before they wrote, 1,000 Plateaus or whatever. But it didn't have that lumbering quality that a lot of scholarly work has. It felt very, intense and glamorous. But yeah, I think probably if you combine that with, hip hop or My Bloody Valentine or something, then it's quite a potent combination, not necessarily intellectually, but in terms of the combined glamour and buzz of this sexy, exciting thinking, and then this music that's very exciting. Sort of, I can see why someone who was 18 or something might be affected quite strongly by it. But that's what happened to me. That's how I got into philosophy. Really was. Actually, no, I was interested. When I was 15 or 16, I was interested in what is the meaning of life? Or why is the world so unfair and unjust? So I was interested in philosophy before I started reading the music press, but that was where I came across, people combining Foucault and The Fall, or Birthday Party and Nietzsche, these sort of quite intense combinations of things.
So there were already references, there were already people doing that in the UK?
Oh, yeah. There were, particularly on the Enemy, the New Musical Express, there were a bunch of writers who were, there would have been intellectuals who would reference, Marshall McLuhan or Marx or something like that. But particularly in the end of the 70s, early 80s in the UK, there was the intake of French ideas, and often it was stuff that had just come out in translation. So it was actually 10 to 15 years old, books that had come out in the 60s in France, but they were sort of arriving and having their impact in British academia, particularly in the area of film studies. There's a guy I know who's writing a whole book about the impact of French theory on UK intellectual life, and two of the main areas were this magazine called Screen, I think it was called, which had all these film critics like Peter Wallen and Laura Mulvey and then the music press, So that's why he got in contact with me. He interviewed me about how I used to read writers like Ian Penman and Barney Hoskins, referencing Derrida and Foucault and Roland Barthes and all these things in a very intoxicating way. And a bit later, I became friendly with one of these writers, this guy, Chris Bowen, and he, when I was a journalist, beginning to be a journalist, and we became friends, and he lent me his own copy of Julia Kristeva's The Powers of Horror. So it's not just, mostly it was indirect through reading this stuff, but occasionally, people would directly influence you by giving you books.
But still your undergrad studies were history, right?
Yeah, that's right. Actually, I applied to do politics and philosophy. There's a peculiar course at Oxford called PPE, Politics, Philosophy and Economics.
Oh, yeah.
And I applied to do that, and I wanted to drop the economics. And then they offered me, I think they correctly divined that I was too interested in continental philosophy. At Oxford, it was a very much about logical positivism and
analytic
and sensible, sensible English stuff. they correctly gathered that I was not suited to study philosophy at Oxford, but that I had something, that, they thought history would be a better fit. So I accepted that. It was actually a good development because I learned a lot doing history. So I did all my reading of continental philosophy in my spare time.
Well, yeah, but it's very interesting. The mention that Martin did at the beginning had a reverberation, because I was rereading your piece, your old piece about the CCRU.
Right.
And as well, it's 5 years as well since Mark Fisher left us. And I wonder, how did you came about to know the CCRU in the first place? And you mentioned this fanzine,
Oh, yeah.
abstract culture,
Yeah.
Is this true? Did you connect with the CCRU activities because of this? Because this was published originally by Robin Mackay.
Yeah. I'm not exactly sure the sequence of events, but I was friends with Kojo Eshin, who was sort of like a ally of theirs. I think he was an associate member. I would, I was living in America, but when I'd come to England, I would often go to Kojo's, we'd hang out, he'd play me records, and he'd tell me about stuff. We'd share ideas. And I'm fairly certain he must have shown me those things or told me about these people. But it's also possible that Mark Fisher or someone, or maybe Robin, just emailed me. I had a website from about 96 onwards, and I would get, people would contact me, usually because of the books or just because I put kind of inflammatory opinions up on this website. And, I had a lot of great conversations with people. It's still fairly early in the days of the World Wide Web and email. So it was kind of a novelty to get like an email from someone you'd never heard of. And I would write long replies to people. I still had the mindset of letter writing, and the epistolary culture. So I had these great conversations, and probably I think the next stage was then Mark. I think I have somewhere like very early emails from Mark. I kept all my emails in documents. So I actually have correspondence with Mark, I think. And then they sent me these things. And I was very excited by them. Some of it's quite hard to understand, but a lot of it, particularly the stuff that Mark did, was pretty clear and very kind of aggressive, very, not aggressive, but like, laying down a viewpoint very strongly. It was very intoxicating, and they looked amazing as well. So I was really excited. And then I guess, I got the sense something really interesting was going on, and they had some interesting allies like Orphan Drift, and there were some other people that was meant to be in the piece that I think only had a quite small role, but I actually interviewed this guy, Howard Slater, who was doing a fanzine called Break Flow.
He's a very good friend of mine. I'm very close to him. Yeah. We collaborated. Right. We've done concerts together. Yeah.
So he was part of this whole scene around extreme techno, hardcore, not really the jungle kind of hardcore, but like the
Praxis, no? With Christoph
Praxis, yes.
Yeah, exactly.
So it felt like there was a guy called Matthew Fuller who did interesting stuff, like to do with, I don't even know what it was about, like hacking and he was like he was someone not in academia, but like using academic ideas in this exciting way. So it felt like there's this sort of what do I call it? A kind of para-academia or renegade academia. Yeah, that was the term. Yeah, like a sort of para-academia, like stuff that was on the borderline between the scholarly and the inflammatory and the renegade. Zamizdat, I think, is another sort of term I would have thrown around. Not really with any real sense of its historical meaning, but like the idea of something that was subterranean, that existed outside, proper channels. And I'd sort of noticed some of the texts quoted me or Kojo Eshin, so I was a little bit flattered to be taken seriously as well. Yeah, they seemed to be very aware of what was going on in the more interesting music journalism of the 90s, and also, yeah, like it was philosophy that was hip to jungle. That in itself was enough to... The fact that CCRU centered jungle and drum and bass at the heart of their thinking was like, enough to bring me on board in itself, I think, because I was such a believer in jungle and rave culture in general. So
it's interesting because there is a lapse of time between the moment in which you publish the piece and then the whole reaction around CCRU that I guess has to do with the anthology that Robin published, but as well this weird U-turn of Nick Land towards the right, etc. But it's very interesting because your piece still encapsulates very well what was going on, or the general idea about what was going on there at Leamington Spa, etc.
Yeah, I don't think there was much else written about them. That's one of the main things, and I don't think there was much where someone, like, it discusses all the ideas, but it's like a reported piece. I actually went, Lingua Franca paid for me to go to England, and I went to their headquarters, and I spent the whole evening with them, and we had a Chinese meal together. I met Matthew Fuller, I met Howard Slater in a fairly greasy cafe in Bethnal Green. I went to Ortham Drift's house, so it's got a reported journalism element to it, which makes it a bit more, I suppose, I did, by that point, I'd never been a real journalist until I moved to America, and I learned to do secondary reporting. So I spoke to people who, like the Andrew Benjamin, the guy they were fighting with at CCRU or in conflict with. I spoke to people who disagreed with them, like Judith Williamson, who gave some great quotes from a more, I wouldn't say traditional left-wing, but like a left-wing critique of the CCRU. So it's a proper piece of journalism. And I'm still a little surprised that, Lingua Franca never ran the piece. I think they thought it was too weird. They were too weird. They weren't sure if these people were real academics. But of course, I'm completely vindicated because, if I was an A&R man, like, if there's such a thing as an A&R person with intellectuals, and I could have signed up, as a talent spotter. I had spotted Mark Fisher, Steve Goodman, Code 9, Robin Mackay and Urbanomic. There was a whole bunch of people, several others, who become important thinkers and publishers or cultural activists, like Code 9 is. I had no idea they were going to do that, but history has proved me right and Lingua Franca wrong. They should have run the piece. Then they would have had then they could have claimed to have spotted these very important people early on. So yeah, I feel vindicated. A smaller version of it ended up appearing in an Austrian intellectual magazine, art magazine, and then I put it on the web, and that's how really it sort of had a life, just being on the web, that piece.
It's interesting because then the Guardian piece on accelerationism, how this fringe philosophy anticipated the future or something like that, it was written in a sort of similar fashion, no? They came here to UWI and they interviewed Ian, and then they went to Cornwall and interviewed Robin. It's
but like 20 years later or something.
Yeah, absolutely. This was like 2015 or something like that. But it was the same sort of, actually it's a sort of copycat thing. And then, do you want to talk or do you have any opinion, because maybe you don't have one, about how then this sort of dirtbag or anti-woke left somehow co-opted some of the ideas that, for example, Mark was introducing in Exiting the Vampire Castle and his later writings?
Right. Oh, you mean the critique of identitarian politics? I don't know. I haven't really been following what the dirtbag left do so much? I mean, what have they taken from him? How do you think they?
Well, I think that the general, obviously there is some sort of reading that you can take against political correctness and cancel culture. So this raw attitude of Marx's writings, I think, for some, let's call it, or I call it, neo-reactionary or, anti-woke political thinkers. But probably this has more to do with the Traptimes podcast and similar people. They found something that already had radical potential, but as well, I don't know, it's tricky. I don't know if Martin has something to say about this.
Well, I don't know. Maybe if you can connect it, if you see, I mean, were you surprised by the turn that, for example, Nick Land took, and because that was kind of clear, or it became kind of clear through the years, but then I guess Mark, I mean, he had this famous fallout with Nick Land, but famous that I actually don't know so much.
Did he? Oh, I didn't know that. You actually had a falling out with him.
Well, these are just kind of legends that I've been hearing through the years, but apparently they were living in a almost like a commune type of situation in Stoke Newington, and apparently at some point there was this huge fallout between Mark and Nick. I don't know the specifics, but I don't know. For me, it kind of connects. It's a kind of catastrophic reaction that I've seen in three figures with different degrees, but a kind of reaction to liberal left or some kind of leftism, you know. Certainly the strongest will be Nick Land. Then I've seen something similar. How it happens is very complex, but I see something like a kind of allergic reaction to some kind of leftist positions. So the second one will be Nina Power, another person who also, you know, mixed philosophy and music writing and many other kind of this transdisciplinary. And the third one, in a much less degree, will be Mark Fisher, with especially the Vampire Castle kind of, because there is a kind of conflict within his thinking in regards to some kind of left position, but at the same time having quite an identitarian position himself in terms of fetishizing maybe is too strong, but like a strive towards some kind of British working class of the social welfare state, maybe that it was in the 60s, 70s, you know, certain kind of elements that was there that seemed that they had a very strong impact to Mark, and that he was defending somehow. That was my impression. So, I don't know if you can comment about this catastrophic reaction towards the left from certain thinkers connected to CCRU.
Well, I probably am not familiar enough with Nick Land's later writings to comment. I mean, I think I've downloaded. Is it they call it Dark Enlightenment? I downloaded it. Yeah, never read it. I just never had the time. I'm sort of academically, or in a literal sense of like in a quite detached way, quite fascinated by this turn of events, because I've long had kind of an interest in reactionary thinking and this sort of poisoned view of the world that you get in certain artists, and whether it's a writer like Celine or I'm trying to think who else. Wyndham Lewis. I read this great little book by Frederick Jameson on Wyndham Lewis. It's really fascinating because there's something about this sort of mindset that produces quite powerful, or very powerful writing, and like Celine or Wyndham Lewis writing is very powerful. Yet it also leads them to these, you know, lamentable political positions. The sort of disgust with humanity that creates this sort of fevered writing fiction also leads them to the sort of it's either fascism or monarchism, or like there are examples of writers who are monarchists, royalists of some kind, or I don't know. There was some writer, I forget his name, a Welsh poet and novelist who believed that the future of Wales should be that it was be independent but be Catholic and have a Welsh king, which is just like several completely impossible scenarios, But that he put all his political eggs in this sort of ridiculous fantasy of what Wales would be like. I wish I could remember his name. He's quite a famous poet, I think. I find that sort of reactionary thinking, or someone, I don't know, I feel like Kingsley Amis at one point was, a communist towing the Russian line and then the Soviet line, and then abruptly, when the tanks go into Hungary, I think he becomes completely disillusioned, then goes to the other extreme of being this very grumpy sort of conservative reactionary figure. I'm quite fascinated by or E.M. Turin. It wasn't E.M. Turin like a Romanian fascist at one point in his youth, and then he becomes this distempered philosopher of decay and misery, sort of Morrissey of philosophy, I once described him as. I find that intellectually, I find it quite interesting, and the idea that people who are reactionary have access to these sort of artistic powers, that their grim view of the world lends itself to a certain kind of poisoned comedy, But yeah, like the political positions are, terrible. And where was I going with this? So I think in a certain sense, from what I gather where Nick Land's thought has gone, it seems to be most consistent in a way with what he was doing before. Like it takes a certain anti-humanist impulse within the CCRU and that amazing book he wrote. It is an amazing book on George Bataille. It's full of loathing for humanity, for organic biological existence, and it's kind of has this apocalyptic delirium to it. That sort of language of fetishizing collapse and sort of enjoying chaos and all that kind of stuff. There seems to be more of a logic to that to that's been carried through to his current positions. I'm not really sure what he politically stands for, but it seems to have the same tenor anyway. Whereas you could say that what Mark was advocating politically in his last years is really a long way from what the CCRU are about. I've been reading Post-Capitalist Desire, and it's full of language to do with care and human flourishing and community. He still has a little bit of I think he has a little aversion to the word community, which is like a sort of aftertaste of CCRU not liking anything kind of worthy and wholesome. But I think the general idea essentially is community, So it's all these sort of kind of quite humanist. I think you probably still intellectually reject the idea of humanism, but I mean, effectively, it's a kind of like a social democratic, humanist, kind-hearted sort of politics that he's proposing, a politics of joy and he goes on about relaxation, the need for people to relax and have less time working, more time just enjoying things, and enjoying themselves. It's quite a sort of cuddly politics in a way that he seems to be heading towards. And that's a long way from the kind of talk the CCRU were doing in the 90s.
Yeah, there is no techno...
Forget the human viewpoint, obsolete. The machine has its own agenda. Technology and capital, spelled with a K, have their own dark will, and humans must be carried along with it.
I was thinking yesterday because I found this meme that probably you saw before with a graphic chart going downwards from the death of David Bowie in January 2016 and things going shit with Trump, Brexit, the pandemic, etc. And I was rereading your book Shock and Awe, where you spotted this grim parallelism between the Thin White Duke era of David Bowie and Donald Trump, and these predictions of a strong leader who would, and I quote, sweep through the Western world with a right-wing, totally dictatorial tyranny. And you said he called for a very medieval, firm-handed, masculine God awareness where we go out and make the world right again. And it's quite interesting because I can see this, no, after 2016, and it's tragic because as well the death of Mark presents this need for all of us, this need of care, general awareness of mental health issues, etc. But at the same time, this huge wave of populism, neo-reaction, abject forms of masculinity, etc. And then as well, we were talking about these movements and figures like Kanye West, like that could be the closest thing to this Bowie of the Thin White Duke, no? I don't know if you agree with this, no? But it's like this figure that suddenly represents, it's the embodiment of I don't know, a strong leader for the avant pop movement. And I don't know if you see... yeah, go ahead, please.
Oh, I think one of the things that's most striking about this era is just the power of where it relates to glam is this power of the image, and this sort of so it's not even like the policies as such or the content of what someone like Trump says. It's just these images that they project. Like Kanye West had this whole thing about the red caps, didn't he? Like with like, how much it meant to him, this sort of weird fetish object of the hat. And I guess this idea of like he seemed to respond to Trump as some kind of like father figure or something, which is, if you look at, there have been articles about, the dreams of Trump fans, how they dream of him as this sort of father figure who came in to look after them and would be like this kindly father, and, so very far from what appears to be the reality of him as a father and as a business leader and all the rest of it. But yeah, these horrific images, like I always think of like the thing with when they came out in front of the White House and stood by the church holding the Bible, or when he came out of hospital with COVID and had that whole ceremony standing on the balcony, tearing off his mask, trying to stop not wheeze because it's like his lungs are in a terrible shape. He's breathing very heavily, but he's trying to do this projection of erect strength, and it's all very fascist. It's also very glam. It's also very PR. It's the languages of visual languages are all coming from the same place, and it's what what a lot of glam artists understood and lived by was the sort of power of these simple images. So I think that's what I think. I don't know how seriously we can take Bowie's thought. He seemed to take in the mid-70s, seemed to take an unwholesome turn. The combination of extreme fame, cocaine, the magic he was reading, and I think he was also picking up on something in the culture then. This talk about a strong hand to deal with all the filth is exactly the same thing as the speeches that Travis Bickle in Taxi Driver delivers, which is around the same time. It's like 1976. There is this period, and then a bit later you have, or around about the same time, I think you have the Charles Bronson movies where he's a vigilante. Do you know those ones?
Yeah.
Death Wish or something, isn't it? Or something like that. You know, it is like, you know, there's been this explosion of early 70s permissiveness, pornography explodes, sexual openness in entertainment and films. Pot smoking is semi illegalized in a lot of parts of America. It's a very liberal, you know, the 60s is kind of happening on a mass level. And then by the mid-70s, there's this reaction. So Bowie was tuned into that, I think. But also he was kind of going crazy as well. So you sort of had to kind of take it seriously, but not seriously in a way. Like, you know, he's obviously never going to be a political leader. But it is interesting that those are virtually the only public statements he ever made in his career that had a political position. And later on, he did that song "Fashion," you know, on 1980, which goes, he presents politics, swing to the left, swing to the right, as if they're just, you know, meaningless swings, you know, like fashion changes, you know, or something. So I think he generally was studiously apolitical. But yeah, I think the nature of his fame and the fact that he had huge crowds, you know, wrapped by him, made him aware of the power of, you know, the singer as a sort of leader, you know, a sort of Führer, you know, and that was in his head as well at that time.
Yeah, it's interesting because, I mean, he used the thunder, didn't he? The thunder in some of the concerts, the kind of Nazi thunder, I guess.
Oh, you mean the lightning? The lightning.
The lightning.
Yeah, that's a very potent image, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know.
But then I guess a lot of, you know, like Throbbing Gristle also took a lot of this imagery. I mean, I don't know who did it before, but I guess it was at that time this kind of imagery that I guess it was made with distance, with ironic distance, and and then, you know, but it's interesting that then after the period, you know, let's say 2016, it's like this distance was the irony changed, the meaning of irony changed completely, and many young people kind of took these kind of symbols or this kind of representations of power for what they were, and the whole context, you know, it's not, you know, you had Trump in power, you had you know, like Bolsonaro, you know, you had, you know, almost fascist figures that
like aesthetically they're fascist. And that's on the level in which they're winning. You know, I mean, when you see some of the things that are talked about and the language, if you ever go on the comments of a magazine like Breitbart or something, you hear people talking about, you know, executing and rounding people up and stuff like that. So, you know, I think there is a real potential of fascism there, but it seems, as far as we can see, it's going to be a kind of fascism of cheating at electoral politics rather than, you know, hopefully rounding people up and killing them. But I don't know, the way things are going, who knows? It's very much like an emotional fascism and an aesthetic fascism and a rhetorical fascism, a fascism, the rhetoric of one nation and closing the borders and restoring things to how they supposedly were so much better. And it's all the rhetorical tropes of fascism are present and correct. It's very disturbing time to be alive, really. And so unexpected. Yeah. I mean, I think, you know, one of the things that I found most interesting about America is that a huge sway of the population want a king, and America's founded on not having, you know, it's this foundational act of American existence as a concept is the kicking out of the king of Britain, and we rule ourselves. But they really want a king. They actually want a dynasty. They want something that, you know, there are people who would happily give Trump electoral, you know, 4 years and then another 4 years and another 4 years. And and then give it to one of his kids. This sort of dynastic tendency within American political life is very strange. The cult of the Kennedys, and then and then this weird thing now where they think like, who's the Kennedy they think's still alive and he's going to come and join Trump and be the vice president?
Oh yeah, it's not Robert Kennedy. I cannot remember the name, but the other brother.
The guy who died. Yeah, I think the guy who died, the one who died in the plane crash or something. He's not actually dead. He's going to come back and be Trump's vice president because forgetting all the actual politics of the Kennedy family, which some branches of it were very, very liberal indeed. Edward Kennedy. But it's to do this glamour of kingliness, the glamour of the political dynasty. And somehow it makes sense in these people's deranged minds that the glamour of the Kennedys would join with the supposed glamour of the Trumps in this, ultimate American royalist uber dynasty. It's just insane. It's insane. It's medieval thinking. It's child thinking. It's not even child thinking, I don't think. It's insulting to children. I don't know. It's just such a bizarre...
But do you follow all the conspiracy things of QAnon and so, even as a cultural product?
I haven't delved deeply into it. I have friends who explore that world and are fascinated by it. I mean, I read articles on it.
Because
I know the basic contours of a lot of these thinking. They're all kind of essentially emotionally the same, aren't they? Bad people are taken over. They're not only do we disagree with them, we can't just disagree with them. They have to be unspeakably bestially, not even bestially, like depravedly inhuman. They're eating children, having sex with children, trafficking children. So you have to make your enemies beyond evil, and therefore that justifies the righteous punishment you're going to impose on them.
But
it's depraved.
It's very, very crazy that something like the Capitolium event a year ago could occur. It's insane if you think about it. You see the images. They are memes, like living memes. Every single image.
It's so weird.
I know that you liked quite a lot Ariel Pink, and I guess he was present there with John Mouse. And
that was upsetting. That was upsetting. Yeah, I mean, I really like Ariel Pink's music, and that was a great surprise and a disappointment that he would be there. I would have thought he'd be smarter than that. But I think it's this emotional, I mean, I shouldn't speculate really, but I think it's this emotional identification that somehow Trump, maybe for people like Kanye, maybe for people like Ariel Pink, represents a sort of weird combination of a winner and a victim. Because a lot of the language of Trump uses is, they're out to get me, they're evil, they're thugs. He always uses the word thugs about Democrats. Democrats are thugs. These radical left Democrats are thugs. And they're persecuting me. And somehow his persecution, even though he's an immensely wealthy person and privileged all his life, and somehow his supposed victimization resonates with his demographic, his core base, who feel victimized. They feel they've been cheated of something, some kind of way of life where, I guess, there were like good industrial jobs and the concerns of white people were centered, and all this kind of stuff. I mentioned the King thing. One thing that struck me is, again, I haven't explored it very deeply, but I am fascinated by all these sort of incel culture and this sort of pickup artist culture and this sort of new masculinity thing. And I was struck by the fact that isn't there a website called something like When We Were Kings? Like that, one of these sort of return to masculinity and men on top and women grateful. One of those sort of anti-feminist, pro-masculinity websites called When We Were Kings. It's such an interesting idea. Like what does that mean? I don't know. But see, the kingliness of Trump the guarantee or the bolster or the support system for all these micro, like you wouldn't really be a king. You might be a king over your girlfriend or your wife. You might be the king of the family. So yeah, I mean it's very standard patriarchy, I suppose. It's not particularly profound, but as a sort of slogan, I thought "When We Were Kings" is quite a interesting crystallization of it.
I don't know. It's obviously as well the thing about incel culture.
No, it's not "When We Were Kings." It's "Return of Kings." That's what it is.
The Return of Kings.
Okay, Return of Kings. Yes, "When We Were Kings" is the name of a documentary, I think, about might be about Muhammad Ali. I'm not sure. But Return of Kings. Yeah. So yeah, we have been displaced from our righteous role as the patriarchs on every level. Whether it's we want a patriarch entertainer as our king, Trump.
Yeah, but it's really depressing that all these subcultures like the incel or alt-right obscure forums are proliferating in a moment like very bleak moment like this, with isolation, people constantly like wired into the internet, etc. And then you see the a decline in the subversive capacity of like new genres of music, but genres of music that entail certain form of social cohesion or tribalism, or I don't know if you found recently any sort of subversive attributes in music subcultures, or you feel that this progressive individualism and isolation by technological mediation is dissolving this tribal attitude that you can or you could have find in subcultures?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I haven't really seen anything in music that's super inspiring and sort of hope on that level. I think it's hard to the moment because everything's kind of suspended. So the normal ways by which music creates communities or energies have kind of been interrupted. I don't know.
Because I read the piece that your song wrote about micro genres, and it's really nice. But at the same time, it makes you think about how all these micro genres are trying to compete in this general attention economy, and how you can select and produce new identities, and it's pretty much like this general dynamic that you can find in social media like Instagram or whatever. So
I was discussing it with him, and I was saying it, like it's with Kieran, and it's like, well, can there really be such a thing as a genre with one artist in it, or even just two artists? What is the point at which you can really say something as a genre? And it's usually when enough people agree, like there's some kind of social energy that gathers around it, so you have enough people to constitute fans of that genre and other artists, and these sort of micro genres or micro genres seem to be too fleeting and too small, really, to have. You compare it with something like hip hop, which is a huge cultural formation. It's a long way from that. On the other hand, some of the subject matter, in some of this music, is coming from people who are trans or queer, or so they're people who are fans of the music often find a connection with it on that level. So you can say it has some
emancipatory.
So it's sort of like a new form of post-geographical neighborhood, I suppose, in a way. I mean, I think some of these artists do actually perform live, and my son's been to like micro raves under a bridge in Brooklyn. So there are these, but it's sort of it's quite seems to have an ability to fracture even more, the fracturing of genres is going on for a while. It was going on in the 90s rave culture when it fractured into all these different tangents, but this is like a new level of speed of fracture and of scale of fracture, where it's like a splinter of a splinter of a splinter. So yeah, how it doesn't seem to lend itself to sort of massification and gathering of energy in a large way. I suppose the most hopeful example of politics and pop in recent history would be Grind for Corbyn, wouldn't it? That would be.
Yeah.
But that actually seemed, as far as we could tell, to have some consequential effects on that election. And I mean, ultimately it didn't all went very badly with Boris Johnson being elected, but there was a moment where it felt like, there was an unprecedented coalition of youthful support for what is actually a pretty moderate left-wing program, but by the standards of politics of the last 30 years, felt pretty radical, some of the things being proposed. But I suppose what interested me I've written about this as someone who was like a fan of early grime and then kind of lost interest in it. But one thing that struck me was that although it had this political effect, you look at the lyrics of grime and they're not socialist in their consciousness at all. It's not even that they don't have lyrics about increasing funding to libraries or protecting the NHS, which you wouldn't really expect. But they don't have it. The actual values in them are all like, life is tough. You've got to struggle. If you dream, you can make it. Which actually connects to Trump, because one of the things I find most fascinating about Trump is him being the president of positive thinking. Like his actual belief system, which is kind of like the American religion, is positive thinking. If you want something strongly enough, you can get it. Which is something that Mark wrote about, I think. Didn't he talk about magical voluntarism was a term he used? This sort of idea that your own fate is entirely in your hands, and if you just have enough willpower and determination, you're going to make it, So, yeah, a lot of the actual sort of lyrics and viewpoints in grime are more on the lines of that sort of, motivational thinking and work hard,
What
about how hard they work,
Oh yeah, sorry.
But so what I'm saying is that what happened was that there's nothing in the content of grime that led to Grime to Corbyn and then Grime for Corbyn and the effects it seems to have had. It was entirely the sort of status as sort of representatives of youth that someone like Stormzy had, that sort of star power and respect he had with young people that had an effect, rather than any content in the actual music.
And what has been the latest genre of music that you've been interested or fascinated by, or that it gave you a kick or excitement, made you feel excited about?
Well, the very latest one, it's not really the genre, because the other artists are quite interesting, but I don't sort of love them. But really, it's this group, Dry Cleaning. That's far and away the most exciting record I've heard. Certainly in the sort of vague area of rock, for a long, long time. And it's not that it's so exciting music. I think it's really good musically, and it's very enjoyable. But it's got quite a traditional kind of post-punk sound. On my blog, I said it's almost like post-punk has become like the blues. You had this certain kind of Peter Hook kind of bass line, You have this sort of scratchy guitar or whatever. You have those formal features of post-punk now. It's codified as this quite narrow set of parameters. But really it's the lyrics and the delivery of Florence Shaw that I think are so amazing. And actually quite soon after sort of falling for this record and listening to it obsessively, I started thinking like, this is almost like it relates to certain things Mark Fisher wrote about, like the boring dystopia, depressive hedonism. There's a lot of references in the lyrics to sort of food, like little snacks and treats you give yourself to get through life. But just the utter sort of, it's a very funny record, but it's kind of sort of heartbreaking at the same time. Like there's a sort of sense of the emptiness of life today and the disappointments and the sort of inanity and stupidity of so much of the stuff that is just the kind of the sort of everyday churn of the reality we live through. So I found it really powerful. In terms of actual music, probably the last thing that I thought was really amazing was all this stuff, all the stuff going on in trap using auto-tune and other effects on the voice, and it's sort of, this stuff that this guy Kit McIntosh wrote a really interesting book about it called Neon Screams on Repeater, and it's rap has kind of gone beyond, there are lyrics and they are almost quite funny and strange, but really it's post language, it's like the voice is just pure texture, and it has a very strange subjectivity in it that's kind of different from earlier rap. It's kind of almost, they're still rapping about, women and expensive designer commodities and sometimes gang life as well. But they seem very kind of, and almost androgynous, like very kind of soft and melted, and partly it's to do with drugs, I think, and the kind of use of prescription, and drugs that are intended to be used against anxiety or depression are being used as drugs of abuse and drugs of intoxication. It creates this very woozy, dreamy kind of numbness, like blissed out numbness. And again, I sort of related to this thing of Mark's, the depressive hedonism, the secret sadness of the 21st century that you wrote about in connection with Drake, and Kanye West and people like that. It's sort of quite a bleak view of the, as a picture of where people's heads are at. It's quite a bleak picture of it, but as music, I think it, people like Migos, Playboi Carti, Future, Young Thug,
but
many others, Travis Scott, just texturally, and it's also, there is more amazingly weird music being made, I'm sure, in tiny internet communities and in academia and in the conceptual electronic world. But the fact that it's happening on the radio, you could turn the radio on, you hear this sort of, to me, as a creature of the era of the radio, if we're driving through LA and I turn on the radio and a track like Goosebumps by Travis Scott is on the radio, it sounds like this melted Radiohead track almost, like from Kid A, or I don't know, some of the Migos songs, and it's actually on the radio. It just seems so exciting that something that strange is part of mass culture. But that really was a few years ago. I think since then, I don't know. What do you think? What excites you?
Well, I don't know. The Donda album by Kanye West, Donda, the last album,
right.
Still is a pretty weird album.
Is it?
Yeah, I mean, for mainstream culture. But you are right. This is something that actually I talked once with Cotton Eye, with Steve Goodman, about the prevalence of very avant-garde techniques in voice processing in mainstream hip-hop.
Yeah.
It's incredible. I don't know. Do you like 100 Gex?
I've heard a few things. Actually, my son was really into them. my son is really, it's almost like the passing of the baton or the job down.
Yeah.
He has that young man's hunger to find new things. He's constantly chasing new sounds, new genres. So he sends me clips of a lot of these things, and some of them I like, but not a lot of them excite me as much as when I was turning the radio on and hearing, Future or something like that. Why do you rate 100 Kicks?
Well, I think it's a good representation of this extremely fragmented world with limited attention span, and this huge mix of genres and lack of any sort of respect for the context-specific attributes of these aesthetics whatsoever. I don't find it like, I feel old for this sort of music as well, but
How old are you?
I'm 36.
36, yeah. Well, I'm 58, so you can imagine how old I feel when Kieran sends me these sort of clips of things. A lot of them, I genuinely I sort of don't quite see the appeal of them, because they're very sort of it's very much like you feel like, I don't know, like if you listen to a lot of it, like a whole mix of it, you feel like you've drunk three Red Bulls or something, or you feel like you kind of like your nerves are shot. It's so full of stuff going on. I suppose in some ways it's interesting actually. Like one of the words they use on this scene is glitchcore. And that's a word that's quite an old word, because it was used around the year 2000 or so to describe Kid 606 and I don't know, certain other, there was a whole bunch of sort of stuff that at that time seemed very attention span weakening and kind of crazed combination of genres. But this stuff is a whole other level, and it's got this sort of extreme auto-tune, and it jumps around between genres in a really manic way. So
I find it interesting precisely for avoiding this trap of retromania. And so I see that these kids, they like Naked City, or they like, I don't know, new metal from the 90s, but they have no interest whatsoever in resuscitate certain scene or something like that. It's like they address this in a sort of extremely detached way, like a color palette, or I don't know how to describe it.
Absolutely, yeah. It's like there's all of history is there for them to steal things from, but they don't have any sense of its context really, or only a very vague sense. And they just take these sort of sounds and these signifiers. The signifiers have kind of got detached from their signifieds in a really radical way, and you can just mush them all together. It's totally like, as you say, like a palette of colours. It's interesting. Yeah, it is without nostalgia, and even when it does use old things, there isn't. Like for instance, some of the stuff that my son's played to me is people actually making modern day jungle. Okay. But it's not like I doubt if any of them have done a lot of research. They probably haven't read my book or any of the other books on jungle. They just heard it on the internet. They probably found a YouTube tutorial that says, here's how to take a break and chop it up. And they've done a version of it that's quite nice. It's quite nice. It doesn't have any, it's hard to imagine it ever being played in a club or having a social dimension of what jungle once meant. But it sounds nice. And there's another artist called Pink Pantheress who's quite big, who takes a lot of her tracks involve taking old beats, almost the whole of a jungle track or a UK garage track, and then putting her own songs on them. And again, yes, it sounds really, really nice. And there might be a little bit of nostalgia for me, but I don't think the artist it feels nostalgia. They're just using this stuff because great old rhythms you can reuse. It's a bit like in the way in reggae culture, like in the 90s, mostly people were doing dancehall, but sometimes they take a very old roots rhythm from the 70s and then put, dancehall ragga kind of vocals over it. It's kind of, it's much less like, it's not like quoting or referencing, it's much more like cannibalizing a car. You take an old engine out of a car and you put it in a new car or something like that. Just totally pragmatic reusing of rhythms.
Yeah, and in terms, and do you know, for example, this label Nega Tapes?
I've seen the name. I'm not entirely sure what it references. Is it kind of world music or?
Well, it's mixing very interesting, like pushing many boundaries, kind of, African rhythms with industrial, hardcore music. Like, it's very varied. There's a lot of varied music, but it's a label from Uganda that is becoming quite big, and a lot of African artists who, the production is
amazing,
very pushing. It's like, and this is getting quite a lot of attention. This connection is, this doesn't make you feel by any means nostalgic, or or maybe they are taking, I'm thinking also of Principe Records, which has already been going for quite a lot in Lisboa.
Yeah.
Like making with Kuduro something really raw and hardcore. And I find this quite exciting.
They are very exciting. That's indeed a good example. They have this band, they have many bands. Duma, who did a crazy mix between, I don't know, greencore and trap or something like that last year, and then they released a 7-inch in Sub Pop, I think, this year. But they had Sounds of Sea, so very, very fast and aggressive music.
Right.
No, it's incredible. And Duma, they are touring Europe now many dates.
And they're on Principe, I think.
No, this is Niege.
Oh, yeah. All right. So, I'll check them out then. They sound good. Yeah, I've seen the name. I sort of, got the vague sense it was something to do with African rhythms and do they have anything to do with what's that style music called? Is it Gakwam or something, or
well, that's in South Africa. I don't know if they have, I don't know if they have some South Africa like Hmong artists, but I think they are connections. I think people they're connecting quite a lot. From what I heard, it's like bringing a lot of people together. I remember one artist is already quite, it was a duo called Faka that
right.
I think they had like production or close to.
Is that the correct pronunciation?
That's what I heard. That's what I heard. Sorry.
Right. It's a good sound. I like that.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. That was a band that I don't know if they're still active, but I saw them live and they blew me away. Like they had a kind of queer style over, very performative and so powerful. I mean, it was just, one of the best things that I've seen, but that was like already 5 years ago.
Right.
Yeah, and I guess another figure that I found very interesting is Pink Sifu.
Pink Sifu.
Yeah. Miguel has seen him live.
Yeah, he's from Philadelphia. No?
Right.
He's from Philadelphia, right? Or I am wrong?
I don't remember. But he has a lot of records that he started maybe, I don't know, in 2015, 14. And then with Black Lives Matter, he did this record called Negro that is so, it's like doing punk, but it's like taking this idea from black metal of necro music, like necro recording. It's recorded so raw, and it's it really fits the mood.
But life is like sometimes bad brains, but other times as well, very like kind of orchestra, free jazz, chaos. It's very interesting.
But he
Very,
has
very,
also a lot of rap,
Interesting.
like a
yeah,
really
yeah.
a lot of rap, and yeah, that's a figure that kind of blew me away for sure. Certainly,
Ah,
I guess for me, it's been people in the last years, people like Chino Amobi, Matana Roberts, Moore Mother, has been people who dealt with history, their fucked up history, like, and obviously there is no melancholy, nostalgia or anything. It's just like hardcore confrontation with this fucked up history and then propelling it into the present. And obviously there is a present that is extremely urgent and, with Black Lives Matter, and is it's the music that I've felt more, well, I don't know, urgent but also sophisticated, and in very interesting ways of, especially dealing with time and history. I mean, Moore Mother, comes from this group called Black Quantum Futurism, in which they apply kind of idea of, African ideas of time, but also in regards to Afrofuturism and, ideas that come from quantum mechanics, and how to play around with time. And for the lyrics, it just kind of blows you away, the way that they take you into places, and they play with different temporalities that you're simply not used to, and it's making something quite unique, certainly non-nostalgic.
It's interesting because actually they are very influenced by Kodo. So and the Otolith group.
Jojo, right?
Yeah.
Right.
So he's the
Interesting. So you were just talking about Pink Cipher, did you say was the name?
Pink's Sifu.
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 Yeah.
That's a very interesting.
Oh, I'll have to check them out.
Very powerful. And in terms of writing, because I was reading your forward to Mark Fisher's K-Punk company, and it's very touching. You really feel that there was something going on at that time, early 2000s, with the blogosphere, that it really kicked something up, and that what you would say, that you will wake up in the morning to see what the other person has written, and Robin was also talking about this today, which sounds like something crucial and urgent was happening every day in terms of discussion. And I was obviously wondering if you get similar feeling in terms of music writing today somewhere, or if there is some kind of exciting writing today that you could maybe think of.
Not really. I think probably where it's happening is probably in books more. I don't know. I mean, there were two books actually, both on repeater last year that really excited me. And one was the one I mentioned, Neon Screams by Kit McIntosh. And then the other one was by Leslie Chow, called Your History. And they're both very sort of original, both very enjoyable, and both short as well. So it's just, as someone who writes these enormous long books, like 600 pages, I think was the last one, I was impressed that both books were like really short but bursts of excitement about music. And there's probably other ones that I'm not thinking of, that where people are doing the most interesting writing around is within this book, within book format. I don't know. It's not really a magazine that I look to regularly. It's there's just sort of names that pop up. Some of them are very old, reliable names. I don't want to say very old. I mean, they've been around a while. Like, you read Philip Sherman on on a new Burial record, and it's really good and interesting. And but then there's, I don't know, there's probably younger names as well that crop up regularly. But there's not really a publication where I sort of check every day, or to see what's going on there. The blogs, there are still blogs, and there are still people who blog quite actively, but there isn't, like someone like Xenogothic.
Yeah.
Blogs.
But maybe
incredible.
he's the only one that he has like an incredible blog that you can expect something.
Yeah,
great.
like very, very long, in-depth essays that are sort of like, seem to have been written very quickly, but like read like something that someone's spent months writing, so that is very energetic, but there isn't, in the old days, there was the sort of energy of that level spread across, 20 blogs that were all in communication with each other. It's a bit of a shame. I do miss that. I mean, I feel like a lot of that energy got pulled into Facebook and Twitter. So
And podcasts, no, as well.
Podcasts. I never quite got with the podcast program, but I appear on them and I do listen to them, and that seems to be where a lot of the sort of energies.
Yeah, the problem is that most of it, I don't listen to a lot of music podcasts, but generally they are like quite of like hot takes, etc. But it's obviously a lot of journalism now is on there. But the problem is as well that this sort of decline of the music as a form of art that consolidates in this thing so-called album is disappearing. So unless you are trying to react to Instagram stories and singles, like really immediate feedback, I don't know, what do you think about this general decline of album and this post-album era? Are you concerned, or you don't mind, or?
I must admit, I find it hard to listen to a whole album myself. It's almost like a sort of discipline of listening that has been weakened. When it happens, when you get an album that you want to play over and over again and listen to many, many times, it's a really great feeling for me. Like Dry Cleaning was one. I don't know. Every year there's a bunch of albums, just a few albums really that have that effect where you want to play them over and over again. But often I find with listening to records that I sort of check them out, and it's almost like ticking a name on a list. I've done that, and it's whether you go back to it, I suppose, is the thing. But there seems to be a tendency for people to make things that resemble albums in the sense, in the classic vinyl sense, like that they're like 40 to 50 minutes long. You don't seem to get quite so many people doing these enormously long. There was a period when the CD was quite a new invention, when people would feel like they had to fill it up, so they do 70-minute long albums. And in rap there was a tendency to sort of do skits and kind of things to pad them out. That was a trend for actually a long time ago, really, and not relevant anymore. But then I don't know, some point in the 2000s, people seem to start deliberately making shorter albums that resembled the length of a vinyl album. Like Vampire Weekend put out a record that was like, their first record was like 36 minutes long or something, 37 minutes long. And that was wonderfully refreshing, because that's the sort of seems to be about the right length.
Yeah.
Unless it has to be like a really sprawling, enormous work, and each track is 25 minutes long or something. There's definitely something about that length of like half an hour to 45 minutes that is, I don't know, maybe it's only people who grew up with vinyl albums that feel that way. I don't know. Maybe my son's generation doesn't have that temporal thing, but it just feels to me like that's the right length for an album that you're going to digest records that are like that, sort of the dry cleaning one is like that. It only has 9 songs, I think, or something like that on it, 10 maybe. It's like it makes for a stronger statement, I think. It encourages people to leave out lesser tracks, or go for a more cohesive mood. I don't know. It seems to be something that there still seems to be, like within criticism, there still seems to be this interest in masterpieces, and like the masterpiece album seems to be a demand within critics and a certain kind of music fan. But in practice, I personally am much more like track oriented, I think. I find there's like, one really amazing tune on a record that's the one I fixate on and I go back to, but the rest of it, the whole work of it, may not have that appeal.
May I ask how are your listening habits? Like, how do you actually, how you encounter a piece of audio? What you have like certain ways of listening or rituals?
Well, practically speaking, a lot of it has become streaming, just because it's so easy. Streaming or checking things out on YouTube, sometimes Bandcamp and things like that. But yeah, a lot of the time it's streaming. I have done writing for Tidal. Some of the things I've most enjoyed writing have been for Tidal, and so they give you a subscription, and it's a really useful thing to have. I suppose we're all supposed to be boycotting Spotify now. I did use Spotify a bit, despite the adverts.
This is crazy. What do you think about this? The thing about the Spotify, because now it should be extremely clear for everyone that they are not interested in music, no? Because in this sort of weird competition between Neil Young and Joe Rogan, they obviously decided that they are content providers, but they are not content providers of music. Yeah.
And so a lot of their stuff now is like podcasts and programs and things like non-musical.
I don't use it either, no, but as a statement, no, deciding that, okay, they are fine with Neil Young opting out, it's a huge statement, no?
It is, and it seems to really backfired. I have to confess I haven't really been following the story, except just that they've pulled all his music off the site, which is like a huge insult, isn't it? Really, it's a huge affront to. And even if you don't actively follow Neil Young's music, like I don't. He's someone that I sort of have this great respect for, based on just a few records, really, like Zuma and Rust Never Sleeps and a few others. And he's an amazing live performer I saw once. But yeah, I haven't actively followed his work for decades, really, but he's such a venerable figure and seems to have integrity and all these things. As far as I know, he's a good person. So it's like but just as a figure in rock, he's this sort of figure of integrity. It's a huge affront.
And the other guy is a charlatan. It's like you are removing a musician that it's history of the 20th century, and you are leaving there a charlatan. It's insane.
Yeah. It is chilling, I suppose. And is it just entirely based on the calculus of the number of streams they get?
I mean, they paid millions, no, for Joe Rogan, I think. When they hired him. But it's scary for streaming as well, because how music depends on certain infrastructure that now is, it has potentially shapes the music relation to larger anti-democratic tendencies then depends on power structures that we have no clue about how do they work. Is really scary, no? Because actually my question about the post album era is that some artists, like for example, I was thinking about Rosalia and other mainstream urban artists, they see that they can make a career out of sporadic singles, videos, collaborations, and this sort of cycle. Okay, you do something with fashion industry, you do something for, I don't know, a video game, and then you release a music video and so, but the album as such, as the result of your artistry, is declining somehow, and I don't know for how long we are able to carry this sort of corpse from the 20th century, like this idea of physical, even though we have this huge revival and problem with vinyl, this idea of carrying a physical.
I was going to say, just adding, going back to the how I listen to things, although practically speaking, a lot of it is either streaming or, some PR people do still send me like zipped files of things, like something like that. It's not a very satisfying way of listening. And I actually recently, like about 3 weeks ago, as you can see, I actually moved my stereo, which had been in the main living room, into this office. And the goal is to get back into the habit of listening to vinyl and make use of this collection, this large collection of vinyl that I've accrued through being a fan, and also, at certain points I would be sent a lot of vinyl when I was first a music writer. So it's all sitting there. It's been sitting there for years, hardly used. And I've always avant-garde electronic music that I want to listen to on vinyl. So I've moved it in here. So far, it's only worked if I just decide to just play vinyl all day. But like if I try and go back and forth, streaming and the internet wins, and then that's a very unsatisfying way of listening, because I find that I'm often like distracted by something else. It might even be looking for another piece of music related to something I'm writing about or that I'm teaching about. So I'll be using the pause a lot. So you're constantly stopping what you're listening to hear something else that's related to what you're actually working on, and it's a very choppy, unmusical way of listening to music. Or at least with vinyl, it's so annoying. It's not that annoying, but it's slightly more annoying and physical to get up and lift the needle up, but you tend to let it roll all the way through. So, and I think that's a better way of listening to music. I don't really like streaming, but it is so insidiously convenient. You can't help using it, I find. So it's a sort of crazy situation, because I have a lot of vinyl, a lot of CDs. I have a lot of tapes, actually. Sometimes I like to get tapes out, cassettes out, and play them. Something about the format, even the sound, is kind of nice, I think. What do you guys use?
Yeah, I agree with you. I also have the three, I have a stereo with all the, with cassette, CD, and vinyl. Actually, CD is quite enjoyable, because it's in between, like you can just like play it and it plays, all the way. Obviously, you don't get the warmth and the...
they sound pretty good though, really. I think for most people, unless you're a real hi-fi, someone spending thousands of dollars on hi-fi, for most people, a CD is a better sound, and you can let it roll through, but you can also reconfigure it to like the exact tracks you like. I think CDs have quite a lot going for them. I think they actually sound better than ever, like judging by reissues.
In fact, I guess now with because vinyl is now taking a year to produce, so I think people are getting back into CDs and discovering, wow, it's actually quite cheap to produce a. They don't have the glamour that they had, but once they had, and it's not vinyl, but it's practical. It's not such a bad format.
Doesn't have the glamour. I don't think there's going to be a glamour of box sets, or all the different ways, whether it's the plastic case that gets cracked or chipped, or it's the cardboard things which seem like nicer, but they tend to get worn out around the edges and start to look kind of shabby and crap. It is never going to have the glamour of something like this. This is actually a reissue.
Yeah,
it's not the real thing, but here's another one, another reissue. Hawkwind, Space Ritual, and then I have all these sort of electronic things, obscure electronic records, that like this one by Ralph Lunston, the Swedish.
You are listening to a lot of early electronic and music concrete stuff, no?
Yeah, it's sort of become this weird obsession. I don't know why. There's something about that era that I don't want to say it's glamorous, but it's got a kind of romance, I suppose is the word. Yeah, it's kind of romance. Somehow, these people very, very excitedly trying to break into a new frontier of music, confident that in the future everyone will listen to this kind of music. They didn't foresee that there would be this return back to orchestras and things like that. Tonality. And you see the images of the studio complexes with all their computers, and it looks like a space station. And sometimes the people are quite formally dressed. You see them with their ties and suits. But then there's also this stuff that in the 70s they tend to have long hair and look more like hippies. I just find an endless interest in it. The fact that it was so widespread, and that almost all these different countries. There's all this amazing Latin American music concrete. Poland, these countries like Poland are like major players. All this interesting stuff is happening. I got very interested in experimental animation, like sort of before digital.
Mm-hmm.
And quite often there's a connection between, like say in Poland, I can't pronounce the name of it's a state-run thing, obviously, studio something, but like they're doing all this really weird, artistically experimental, kind of disturbing or grotesque animation, but then they also get like Katowski, can't remember all the names, all these bogus law Schiffer, I think is another one. All these people who were like music concrete guys do the soundtracks to these really weird, creepy animations out of Poland and Czechoslovakia. And so I find that connection really fascinating as well. But there's just an endless, there's more and more of it. And there's all that, but it's very interesting how many female electronic experimental people there were, and Pauline Oliveris is like a really famous one, but there's like many quite obscure ones, and maybe only did a handful of things that ever got on record. You look them up and they have a long list of compositions, but maybe one or two pieces got on like a compilation of stuff that came out on a label with a title like electronic music and I don't know, just a very austere sort of title.
Do you know, Robert, this album that actually it was your present, Martin, Roberta Settles, Isolation?
No, I don't know that one.
You will love it.
Yeah, what's
the name of the artist?
Roberta Settles. She was.
Yes, I do. Yes, I have come across that. Yes, exactly. She's someone who I found on the internet, and there's only a few pieces, right? But like, didn't she go on to design shoes or something?
Yeah. In fact, I was going to try to. I was living in Stockholm. She was living in Stockholm. She's American, and in Gamla Stan, she had this. It's not just shoes; it's sandals.
Sandals. Oh, that's specific.
Yeah. And I was going there and see if I could meet her, and then she died. I played in the Homage concert, which was, I guess, a highlight in my life. But see, that record in memoriam to Rick Meinhof, and yeah, it's a very interesting record. There was a record label run by the state, but like the avant-garde, maybe the studio, maybe there is this amazing studio in Stockholm called EMS.
Oh yeah.
And there was this label that it was a state run, but like by the kind of avant-garde, I guess people maybe connected to tech sound and free jazz and things like that. They invite her to do the record, but then because of the title, and I guess maybe also the artwork, they said no, it's too radical. You cannot.
So is that it's been reissued, has it?
And then no, in fact, no. She did. She put it out herself. Right. Crisis in Music, the label, and it's the best, coolest record. With the cover, the plastic, everything is just like the coolest in, I guess, 80s.
I've not seen that one. I heard some other things.
I have it here, but I won't find it. But otherwise, but it's like the sleeve has the blood in the plastic sleeve, and then the album has these images, of Ulrike Meinhof from the newspaper.
Yeah, with amazing text and everything and then the record is ultra sophisticated, minimal. It's like pre-Bernard Gunther, super, super quiet but precise electronic music. One of the best records, maybe the coolest record that I can think of. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I've got to check that out. Yeah, it just seems to be endless. And so, yeah, it's just a weird obsession that I've pursued. I don't know. I'm less interested in what's coming out of the Musical Academy today. I don't know why. There's something about the sound of this early stuff, the kind of reverbs they used, and I think you can hear more struggle somehow with the technology to achieve the results. I don't know why that should matter. I don't know why. Why should it matter that you have to struggle? I don't know. I feel like it's just something you can sense. Sort of monumental ambition with when people were struggling, like cutting up little bits of tape and sticking them together, and it taking a month or something to make a track. Whereas nowadays you can just move things around very, very easily and create similar kind of weird constructions of sound. But there seems to be you seem to be able to hear the facility of digital culture in it, and it doesn't quite have. But then again, my interest used to have a sort of cut-off point, and then it's gradually creeping into the 80s and 90s and the early days of digital, when it was quite clunky. There's a kind of clunky early digital sound, which the pop music version of that would be like The Art of Noise, where they had to use very, very short samples. Like a sample was like 1 second long, or 1.2 seconds long, I think was there. So they have a whole aesthetic built of these stabby sounds, and so you can in experimental music using early digital technology in the 80s and 90s, you have a sort of similar feeling of struggle against those limitations that becomes appealing.
In fact, I'm thinking. I'm sorry. Please go ahead.
Go on. I suppose it's an odd way to react to music. It's almost like a kind of Puritan aesthetic, a Protestant work aesthetic or something. Like they really struggled. It was hard for them, but I think it comes through in some way. In the same way, like a music where there's a real drummer sweating. It may not be as impressive as some beats you can program, but it has a certain quality that makes it different. Not necessarily superior, but definitely. You hear the exertion, you hear the band, physically exerting themselves to make the music.
Yeah, I was thinking of because while reading, your foreword to Mark Fisher's, I discovered Degeneration, the group that he had, the record Entropy in the UK. And I could really feel like they were pushing with the samplers, what they could do, and start to do the breakbeats, Manchester, but it's like a very sophisticated Manchester type of music with great samples. But you could feel that they were trying to push do something with
Yeah.
music. You do something with sound. Do kind of, but like I was trying to think of the tension that you were describing in regards to what concrete music was doing to music, and like the way that it was tearing it apart, and there was a contrast to, I mean, perhaps with mainstream music. It's like really offering a new approach in terms of structural music that will demand a new perception in what music will mean. And it was at the same time happening when music had the power to subjectify young people in ways that maybe never before in history had, because obviously the record history is quite short. And I think both of those two things, the capacity to structurally push music around, and that capacity for music to have a strong impact in young people, both have obviously dissipated. And I think maybe for you more than us, just because you were a bit younger and perhaps you were at the peak of that moment of the capacity for music to really have a strong impact on young people and make them, as maybe for you, but like what Robin was saying, that he started to have an interest in philosophy because of music, and like that music had that potential to shape young people's desires, ways of thinking, ways of dressing, and I think that is really changing, or it's not. It doesn't have. I mean, certainly with fashion and everything, yes, it says what people. But I think that capacity to change young people's perception, and I have such a strong role in their life. I think that's changing.
Yeah, I often felt, well, not often, but I've increasingly felt like, very much aware that sort of my whole framework of thinking about music comes from the 60s, really. And that's why I was kind of interested in the fact that Mark Fisher kind of was drifting back through time in his later writing and getting into people like Mark Cuser and talking about the Beatles. Like in the Post-Capitalist Desire that I'm reading right now, he sort of brings up the Beatles as sort of living this dream life that everyone should live because they could just do exactly what they wanted. But as they got more and more famous and powerful and wealthy, they become more and more experimental. He holds it up as this ideal of life. Of course, hard to imagine how most people could live like the Beatles, but yeah, the Beatles certainly, I think, represented for youth a sort of the band itself, the idea of the band as this group of people is like a little microcosm of some kind of collectivity, I think. Some ideal way of living where, work is play and play is work, I think is that's a very 60s idea, I suppose. But yeah, even, like punk and post-punk obviously still have a relationship with the 60s, and then even when you get to like rave, I think the part of rave I was most interested in did not really particularly have any relationship with the 60s, but like, initially people talked about the second summer of love, and using the word rave is a sort of word that was used in the 60s. Pink Floyd would have an all-night rave. There was a youth magazine called Rave. People talk about ravers, like people who were just really wild dancers. So yeah, but all of that feels like, I think probably for young people now, that all feels like a long time ago, I should imagine, and very hard to reconstruct and relate to what they're doing now. I'm teaching at the moment, and a lot of the courses I do draw on stuff from the 60s, 70s, 80s, and although I'm doing my best to reconstruct the situation that these ideas emerged from, and these musics and their utopianism, I'm aware that it must seem like a really long time ago to a lot of these students who were born after the year 2000.
Yeah.
Some of them were. Some of them would have been born around about, I don't know, late 90s, but yeah, most of them are like, you know, entirely 21st century people, and the conditions don't apply. And but I think, you know, I think clearly music does have some role in shaping consciousness. I mean, particularly with what's going on with gender and sexuality. I think, you know, there's a lot of music that relates to do with that, and like sort of has a kind of emo-ish kind of quality, is very much dealing with pain and loneliness and confusion and stuff in the way that indie music has before. So it's not that it doesn't have, you know, and it's not that people don't pay attention to what singers say or their public statements or their, you know, their allegiances, you know, and the stands they make. People still set great store.
Sorry it just another thought came to mind in order to complement. Yes, but I guess the potential for our revolution is too much, but for change society, that has disappeared, because in the 60s it had the potential and it was transforming, you know, many of the values, and it was but at the same time there was the possibility of something happening that it could be otherwise, you know. Maybe 68 started to break that dream, but the potential that, you know, there could be a future, a very different type of future, that in the 60s was obviously available, and then that has gone down the drain. And now it's not surprising that you are describing this music with the term depressive hedonism, I think it was, you know, like that. There is, because there is this, what, you know, Mark Fisher would call capitalist realism, which I think it's a very problematic term, you know, because it's totalizing, you know, it's almost like ontologizing the power of capitalism, which, you know, it's something that we're just reproducing, but the possibility of thinking that life could be otherwise, that it could be, you know, that definitely has changed and made the potentiality of music to have a very different role, you know. While previously it did change society, it did change, you know, and it did maybe offer a point towards a different type of reality. Now that has certainly dissipated, and it's like you are in the trap, and let's see how you deal, you know, with the trap that we are in. Interestingly enough, you know, the trap is the music that you are, you know, that is describing maybe some of these feelings.
It's so appropriate, the word trap, isn't it? That, it is one of the most globally popular forms of music. I did a piece for The Face a few years ago that was about the internet. I think I even worked out with something like Trap Internationale, like deliberately playing off the associations of the word internationale. But like, you know, the fact that there are people making trap in Slovenia, in you know, all around the world, there's forms of trap music, and they all have the same bleak view of life. Really, is at the root of them. Talking of the long life of the Beatles, though, I was very struck that Ray Strummer did this record called Black Beatles. Again, that idea of the Beatles as this somehow representing this perfect existence, and you know, a life we'd all like to live. You know, and they're boasting very humorously and touchingly that they have attained that level of life's just a groove. You know, so I think it says something like, there's a line about, you know, I'm like a young man living like an old geezer, like a really wealthy person. Unfortunately, Ray Sherman also did a song called Up Like Trump. This is before Trump was elected, but, you know, where Trump is sort of their idea of, you know, a great life, living like Trump, you know. so yeah, it's different kind of messages coming from the same thing. But what was I going to say? I had something to say that was related to this. It's gone. Sorry.
No worries.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. Yeah, I mean, I suppose the question, you know, is the sort of big question is whether it was all an illusion or whether it was actually there really was this moment when pop music had, certainly I think it felt at the time that there was this explosion of youth energy that was initially just this raw demand for fun and excitement, and which was like early rock and roll in the early 60s, and then it achieves consciousness of itself. And then the Beatles, and particularly John Lennon, go through all the different stages of it. They have the attempt to leave Western consciousness by exploring drugs and mysticism. Then he gets into politics and does all these really strong statements. And Imagine is a very strong lyrical statement of another way of life is possible. There's a famous interview with is it Red Dwarf or with Tariq Ali, where Lennon and Yoko talk about revolution and the workers live in a dream and all this kind of stuff. He's wearing a black beret, power to the people, and then it all collapses back into private life and the marriage and this idea that I think Yoko said something like, I don't know what it was, but it's basically we can make heaven on earth, but only between the two of us and our kids,
Oh yeah.
and our inordinate wealth, So it's this collapse into just the last album's called Double Fantasy, isn't it? Which is sort of like, the return to a very privatized hope, So the whole trajectory of it is sort of in there. You can see a similar trajectory with Sly and the Family Stone. Like you could say there's all this hope and unity and crossing racial boundaries with the early Sly Stone music, and then There's a Riot going on is kind of like a blueprint for hip-hop, really. It's where the beginnings of the next phase of black music and the beginnings of hip-hop really kind of could be said to start from at least the consciousness in that record, which is very bleak consciousness. And then, so there's all these sort of moves are sort of recapitulated in slightly different ways over the ensuing decades. Rave music is sort of like this, politics of joy and community, and then it gets a turn to the dark and becomes much more gritty, and There's a Riot going on, with Jungle, and sort of reformulations of the same material, the same impasses, I guess, are sort of confronted and evaded and reconfigured over and over again through the history of music.
There is certain elements that makes certain musics at particular time exciting. There is something that is doing. And I just wanted to ask you, what do you think these are? What are the related kind of elements or connections that makes certain music interesting? What are those things that then dissipate and then maybe stops having that kind of edge? What it brings these either scenes or groups or musicians, that edge? What constitutes what it makes that interesting vis-a-vis the time that they were done?
Oh, that's a big question. I don't know. I mean, I think I tend to this sort of, I don't know if this is the right use of the word dialectical, but there's a feel like with music, there's almost like a kind of corrective mechanism within it. It go a certain path and pursue it, and then it becomes a dead end, and then people realize that something was missing. And maybe not even consciously, but realize that, but the sort of something drives them in a completely different direction. So I'm trying to think of a good example. Well, with say with post-punk, post-punk comes out of punk and it's presenting the world in stripping the romance out of the world. In an important sense, it's kind of no fun music. The message of it is no fun, even though, say, when the Sex Pistols cover No Fun by the Stooges, it's the most exciting, stampeding music, and they make no fun sound like fun. But I suppose that's the trick of punk, that it's it's dealing with all this negative stuff, but somehow it's affirmative, even as it negates. And then post-punk develops that, and you have the existential despair of an agony of Joy Division, or a more political kind of worry, anxiety, guilt, represented by a group like the pop group. But at a certain point, it feels like, the music's just has lost touch with some element of pop music, which actually is fun, sexuality, enjoyment, and then you have this sort of phase of a return to pop. I don't know, similar things you can track in the development of dance music, where there's a kind of drive to sort of make the rhythms more and more challenging and more pushing at the edge of being not groovy. It's like this. With something like jungle, it's like testing your ability to dance to it. But then music gets too punishing or too difficult, and then there's a sort of switch back to more hedonistic, house music kind of grooves, or a simpler kind of drum and bass rhythm that is actually easier to dance to. So I just tend to see it sort of going through these phases, and then it corrects itself. And so the way it works is like making a record that sounds like Joy Division in 1979 is like the most amazing, crucial thing. But to do the same record in 1983 that doesn't have the same meaning is actually a kind of boring thing to do. I don't want to name any particular groups who are doing it, but it's mean. But there were a lot of people who'd missed that, and Joy Division themselves have moved on to do New Order, make danceable music, still having a certain sadness or emotional content anyway that related to Joy Division, but essentially really good danceable club music. Whereas other groups were still sounding like Unknown Places or whatever, and it's no longer, So there's something about a record that is timely in its moment can then become a classic, So it still has the same power. It's not that it becomes outmoded, but the actual procedure of making that record becomes outmoded, or not as interesting a thing to do, Which is why I say, at a certain point, grunge was like a really powerful statement. And when it broke into the mainstream, that was really exciting. And then, by the time of 1996, and I don't know, the Foo Fighters or whatever, it's just doesn't have the same sound, doesn't have the same impact or meaning, So it's a sort of historical sense of music. But at the same time, I think in any great music, there's something that always works. I think that's one of the interesting things about music is you can put it on decades later, and there's something in it that you can just reactivate, and it has this effect on you, just like a drug or something, right? Yeah. So I wouldn't want to say timeless, because we're talking about a fairly short, brief span of time in the history of humanity, and quite likely in 500 years it'll be incomprehensible. But at least within our lifetimes, there's a sort of timeless or time-defying quality to most music that's good, that you can just dip into it, and whatever is, there's some things going on in music that are sort of go beyond the history that made them, if you know what I mean. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, like if you put on an Al Green record, or I don't know, like if you put on Dance to the Music by Sly Stone, and you happen to have read a book about Sly Stone or read Greil Marcus on Sly Stone, it will enrich your understanding of what Sly Stone and the Family Stone meant at that time or whatever. But on a certain level, Dance to Music is like a fantastic machine, like you just turn it on and your mood just immediately elevates. And, if you have awareness of history and you know what the meaning of a multiracial group that had men and women in the same band, and the meaning of each singer each member of the band takes a turn to sing, a line, and the democracy of it and all that. You can read all that, but just purely as sound, it's like, it's just an endlessly effective machine for elevating your mood beyond any of the interesting thing about that song is, which relates to this idea of politics and pop, is like there's virtually no lyrical content in Dance to the Music, yet there's no doubt that it's a political event. It's a political event, just the fact of it, and the lineup, the composition of the band, and the joy in it, and the shout in it, the shout of joy in it, is enormously socially, politically resonant at that time. But the actual lyrics have almost zero content. I'm going to add some bottom so it's easier for people to move their feet, I think is one line. And the chorus is dance to the music. So it's not, the power of it is not in the power of it is in the performance, as opposed to, or the music rather than in the words, the text, which I think is the case with a lot of music historically, isn't it? It's not necessarily profound on a verbal level.
Yeah,
it's something in the singing, something in the energy that's created.
I was rereading Retromania and this passage in which you talk about collecting Pokemon cards with your song. And I was thinking about this in the current context of the NFTs.
Oh, right.
And how these kids, maybe not your son, no, but many kids that they went through Pokemon, now they are being exposed to NFTs and so on. This idea of collecting objects, and you mentioned Benjamin, and it's very interesting, no? How digital, not mechanical reproduction, but digital reproduction now is gonna play a whole new game with the whole thing of the metaverse, etc. And all these like young people are being exposed to a commodity that it's very, very strange.
I haven't really read much or thought much about NFTs. But just sort of naively, it seems like it's a naive comment. Seems like it's something that feels like an extension of Baudrillard's thinking, right? About value, value floating free of solid form, symbolic value. So this is like a sort of iconicity without the actual icon. It does have a relationship to Benjamin's ideas. Like there's somehow you're buying a stake in something just purely on its reputational associations, right? And it's aura as in terms of knowledge and hipness, and all these things, all these intangible things that are a big part of how the economy and the culture work anyway. But this is like a sort of ultimate abstraction of it. Was that fair? That's a very obvious comment. It's mystifying to me. Like I can't understand it. I can't understand how you can invest. Is it like a form of investment? It's sort of an investment, isn't it? Like it's like sort of like, but rather than own the painting as an investment, you're owning a kind of share in a idea. I don't know. It's very confusing to me, and I don't.
It's this idea of creating like digital scarcity. So
right. Yeah. Oh, right. Interesting. That's like a limited edition print, but without the print.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Sorry,
but it's not. I mean, I thought what is just unique is the inscription in the blockchain, but the thing can be totally reproduced and
it can be because there is
people keep it. I guess that's open, right?
Well, yeah, that depends. But there is this whole fuss about this DAO organization that apparently they bought for $2 million, the Jodorowsky Bible for the project of Dune, and they thought that they were going to be able to reproduce this digitally with this NFT mindset, and obviously this is not the case because you have no rights to use Moebius paintings whatsoever. When you buy the NFT, the only thing that you buy is this little piece of the protocol, and that's all. But it's the very production of digital scarcity. So it's like trading cards, but without the card. But obviously you can't speculate with this, no? And it's very disturbing because for kids it's like this idea of surprise, etc. Like they are going to release, and it's very weird to me, very very weird. Without going into the economical analysis of this whole thing, which is strange.